wanted to start with a topic that's kind of seen as a hot topic these days, and that is the future of work. How many of you have heard people talk about the future of work? Okay. It's a hot topic, and a lot is at stake when we think about how we're living under unprecedented levels of inequality and lots of political volatility. The future and quality of jobs is a really important topic, and we all have a lot at stake. So it's no wonder that everyone from candidates to office to the media, elected officials, academics, everybody is asking this question, what will the future of work be? And for us, when we think about how we would approach that question, we might ask not just what will the future of work be, but where will it be? And the reason why I say that is because usually when we want answers to big questions, we go to centers of power, right? Like we're here in Silicon Valley where a ton of technological innovation is being driven. If we wanted to go to look for answers in what the future of politics would bring, we might go to Washington, D.C., or the future of culture, we might go to Hollywood. Well, we would say from our experience at the National Domestic Workers Alliance that rather than go to these centers of power, that we might actually learn a lot more about the future in the margins if we really look into what is happening at the margins and in the shadows of our economy. And the reason why we say that is because we work in this workforce that actually works in our homes, the quintessential non-traditional workforce, and one that has really existed at the margins for generations. It's the work that is about supporting our families, the nannies who take care of our children, the home care workers who take care of our parents and our grandparents, or the personal care aides who support our loved ones with disabilities, the house cleaners who maintain order and sanity in our crazy, chaotic homes. It's the work that makes everything else possible, because it allows for all of us to go out and do what we do at Google or anywhere else in the economy, knowing that some of the most precious aspects of our lives are in really good hands. And one of the things that people don't actually know about this workforce is it's some of the fastest growing occupations in our entire economy. So right now, our demographics are changing not just in terms of race, but in terms of age and generation. With the baby boom generation aging at a rate of 10,000 people per day turning 70 in America, yeah, every 8 seconds, someone turns 70. And as a result of advances in healthcare and technology, people are living longer than ever before, so much so that we've actually added an entire generation onto our lifespan without much of a plan for how we're going to adapt to that. And millennials are starting to have babies at a rate of 4 million babies born per year. So on both ends of the generational spectrum, we have a huge increase in the need for care. A huge increase in the need for care. And this workforce is going to be a huge part of the solution. And so every year, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, home care, for example, is among the top 2 or 3 fastest growing occupations in our entire workforce. A lot of economists are predicting, in fact, that by the year 2030, if you take childcare jobs and elder care jobs combined, we're talking about the largest single occupation in our entire workforce. And it makes sense because these jobs are jobs that can't be outsourced, right? And they're not going to be automated, at least anytime soon. Palak, who you're going to hear from in a minute, often talks about how they've been trying to build a robot to fold a towel in a lab in LA for 11 years, and they still haven't been successful. So at least for the foreseeable future, we're going to need humans to do this work. But what kind of jobs are these jobs? These are jobs that aren't even really considered in our culture real jobs, right? We don't think of the women who do this work as professionals. It's often referred to as help, right? Not even real work. Culturally, it's associated with women, and as a profession associated with women of color. right? Some of our first domestic workers were enslaved African women. Lots of immigrant women do this work. And there's a long history of exclusion in our labor law that has really shaped the conditions of this work. In the 1930s, when our core labor laws were put into place, Southern members of Congress refused to support them if they included protections for farm workers and domestic workers, who were largely African American at the time. So those exclusions have shaped the nature and conditions of this work. And a lot of these protections that you and I take for granted when we go to work every day, this workforce has never known. And then you combine that with the fact that this is a workforce that is almost completely invisible. You could go into any neighborhood in Palo Alto or anywhere, in any community, and not know which homes are also workplaces. It's not like there's a list or a sign or a registry anywhere, right? And there's no HR department, there's definitely no water cooler, and there's not even a coworker that you could go to for support. So even just the nature of the work is incredibly isolating. And what that means is we've got a situation where these jobs are among the most precarious, most vulnerable, and most undervalued in our economy today. So these are going to be a large share of the jobs of the future, but they're actually really not good jobs. And what we have is a situation where workers don't have clear job descriptions. They have really unpredictable hours, sometimes having to piece together work, right, from different employers just to make ends meet. No job security, no access to a safety net or benefits whatsoever. No training or career pathways, right? And what that ends up meaning is that these are often poverty wage jobs where the workers who we're counting on to take care of us and our families can hardly take care of themselves and their own families doing this work as a profession. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when I first started doing this work, in 1998, oh my God, 21 years ago, I first started organizing domestic workers in 1998, and the conditions facing domestic workers were very much seen as conditions at the edges of our economy, really in the margins, in the shadows, almost exotic in a way. And 20 years later, as I look around and I look at the working conditions of workers throughout the economy, more and more of American workers are dealing with some of these very same conditions. Lack of access to a safety net or benefits, lack of consistency of hours, right, or predictability of schedule, lack of job security, having to piece work together, right? These are conditions that are becoming more and more familiar to more and more workers every single day, which is why we often call domestic workers the original gig economy workers, right? And which is why we often talk about this idea of looking to the margins, because these are conditions that domestic workers have been facing forever, for generations. And if you had seen them, you would start to see glimpses of what is the future of work for more and more workers. Now, what's also interesting about this is that our entire social framework and social safety net has really failed this workforce, right? Our social policies have excluded this workforce, and even strategies to change conditions have really failed this workforce. Like collective bargaining, for example, right? Unionization. How do you collectively bargain when there's no collective and there's nobody to bargain with, right? So none of these traditional mechanisms, systems, or frameworks for social policy have served this population, our workforce. And so what that means is that we've actually, as an organization, emerged out of that failure to try to address these conditions, that we were in some ways born out of a failure of established frameworks. And we've had the room, therefore, at the margins to experiment, to innovate, and we've been forced to be creative about how we solve for opportunity and dignity and equity for this workforce. So when we look at the margins, not only do we see the future in terms of the threats right? Like this workforce has been at the forefront of so many of the major changes that are shaping our future. Everything from the aging demographics to the deterioration in the quality of work to the crisis facing migrant families right now, right? So many of these trends that are shaping the future, they've been at the forefront, and so we can see the threats in the future in their experiences. But we can also start to see the solutions and the innovation that's possible, not just for this workforce, but for the future of work as a whole.
Hey everyone. So picking up where Ai-jen left off, our social movement employs many different strategies, right? We've got a lot of different strategies at our fingertips on how we can actually address the problems that we're talking about. Some of them involve changing laws and policies. Ai-jen was at the forefront of the first domestic worker bill that passed in New York, and it took 11 years for us to actually make that happen. Some of it involves changing culture and partnering with Hollywood. As we talked about the film Roma and how we kind of campaigned and rode the waves of that. A lot of our work has to do with organizing workers and centering them in a leadership trajectory so that they're at the forefront of our movement. But also, we've now ventured into your world, into the world of technology and innovation, and that's where I'm going to focus a lot of, my remarks today in sharing with you, because we're obviously here at Googler and our Googlers for the day, as Ai-jen said. Okay, so 5 years ago, we launched NDWA Labs, and the idea was that we needed a container, right? A place within our movement to house all kinds of ways to throw spaghetti at the wall and to do the kinds of things that Ai-jen was saying. Where traditional frameworks have failed us, what else can we invent? What else can we do? And no limit to the method, but more around just anything goes. How can we actually get at the root of this problem and solve it? At the same time, the labs was also responding to the way that technology was disrupting everything that we knew about domestic work, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that everything from the way that work is found, the internet was changing. The way that work is mediated, the internet was changing. The way that people got paid was changing. Everything from the expectations of how people are expected to communicate with their employers on the job and get pictures and all this kind of stuff was completely disrupting everything that we knew about the domestic work markets. And so what we decided to do was really focus on two areas, right? And kind of hone in on where can we really experiment. One was on building products and tools, and we're going to hear to talk to you about Aaliyah, which has been referenced, which we're really proud of, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. And the other was to really focus on collaborating with private sector partners, Google, for example, but also Airbnb and Thumbtack and others here in the Valley, on how we can actually work together to establish fair market conditions. How can we actually work together to shape the way that the market functions and create an equitable future for everyone? So our core belief, right, in the labs is that technology can be a force for good. That's a core belief that we hold. And I think what we've seen is that technology has been often used to optimize for convenience or efficiency, at times profit, obviously. But the question that we're chasing is how can we also use technology to chase dignity and equity? How is it that we can build something that does that? And so I'm really excited to share with you that we've launched Aaliyah, largely in part with the partnership with Google.org in December. And this has been our flagship product that has kind of come out of the 5 years of tinkering and watching things not work. And I'm sure you all are familiar with that process here. Mm-hmm. I would maybe have some epic failures. And what Aaliyah is the world's first portable benefits platform. And it's a new tech-powered way, right, to essentially extend the social safety net to millions of people who've never had access to it. That's at its core what we're doing. And the key part about it is that we've made it really easy, right? So if you think about domestic workers as some of the most difficult users to solve for, part of what we're doing here is making it really simple and easy for that workforce to get access to things that we all take for granted, a paid day off or life insurance or, accident insurance. So the key problem, right, and I know you all talking, what's the problem we're solving, right? So the key problem that we're looking to solve is what you see on the screen, right? That most domestic workers work for multiple people and they don't have access to the formal social safety net for the most part. And because they don't work for a single employer, their benefits aren't contained in one place. And so to really break it down, what I mean is, if you think about it, a house cleaner, right, who works for herself, maybe she might have 10 or 15 clients that she cleans for. If she doesn't go to work one day, she doesn't get paid. That's not a problem that most of us actually really have to grapple with. But what it means for her is that if she doesn't get paid, right, and you're already living on the margins of the economy, that means you're risk not being able to pay rent. It might mean that you can't take care of a sick child, or it means that you're working while you're sick. And we all know that that can be quite an awful experience. And so for cleaners in particular, this problem is really, really hard to solve for. It's really hard to solve for because if you think about it, people are working in the gray, mostly in the gray economy. They're off the books, right? They're working in the cash economy. They've got multiple employers. And even if those multiple employers wanted to contribute their, fair share, so to speak, to the domestic worker, there's really no easy mechanism in place to do that. And so that's actually what we built. That's what we built. What we built is a technological platform that at its core allows for each one of the individual employers to contribute to a single worker's account, right? So now you can think about the application of this in all kinds of ways across the economy. But it's pretty simple. Basically, clients, they go to the Aaliyah platform if you employ a cleaner. So if any of you do, you should do this right away. You go to the Aaliyah platform, you register, you look for your client, you send an invitation to your cleaner, and you basically put your credit card and you set it and you forget it, and you're done. And you're basically paying a recurring benefits contribution to the domestic worker. On the worker side, basically the cleaner is, the idea here is that multiple employers are doing this. She's aggregating and accruing all of these small contributions. We've set it at $5 a cleaning job right now. It's just a policy of the platform, not a truism forever. But if you think about it, all those micro $5 contributions are getting aggregated over the course of the month into the domestic worker's account, and she can apply that to basically, an a la carte menu of benefits. And this is a really important part of our design, which is to allow for the workers to choose which benefits they need and want versus saying there's a one-size-fits-all policy here. The other thing about this is that it's a platform, right? And that ability for us to be able to test and iterate what benefits do workers really need and want, and then slot something out and put something else in, that's the kind of, I think, as you all know, the beauty of building a platform versus a single product, for example. Okay, so at its core, basically, what we're doing is allowing, and this is really, I think, disrupting the entire benefit system, right? Because what we're saying is the benefits travel with the worker, they don't stay with the job. So if a client rolls off or you stop working for a client because they move to a different state, your benefits aren't disrupted. You may need a different payer to pay in as you kind of, work up your kind of black book of customers. But what it means is that the actual package of benefits does not change, which is really helpful, is what we're hearing from the workers. This is kind of where I want to share some insight with you about housing the lab within the social movement, right? So the NDWA Labs, I'm a leader in the actual social movement and the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and we now have this innovation arm that's called NDWA Labs. And there's a real important theory and practical reason for doing it in this way. Right, so the first is that a lab within the social movement has real advantage. And that's because no one knows the problem better than us. I can guarantee you that. Nobody knows the problem. We've been organizing workers for decades. We've got, the combined wisdom on our staff is incredible because people have been working at all parts of this invisible part of the economy. And, what that meant is, we were kind of starting from a much more advanced understanding of the problem which then means our kind of first MVP or our prototype, which, Aaliyah really is at this point, we believe, and what we're learning is true, is starting from a much more precise place in terms of addressing the actual issues that people are facing. The challenge for us, and this is kind of partly why we're here with all of you, is that we're really stretching. We are stretching into the world of building products and technology, and we're a social movement. And part of that, as I think all of you probably experience in your roles here, is that translating all of that data and that wisdom and all of that activity into something that is a tactical, concrete product that creates value is not easy. And we've always worked on changing laws. Like, we're really good at changing laws. Like, we know how to change laws. And we're working really hard on changing culture, and that seems to be somehow a little bit easier than figuring out how to build a real product that can scale efficiently, and which is why we're excited for this partnership and all of the work that we're doing with Chelsea and Google.org to kind of have Googlers come in and co-create with us. The thing that we are laser focused on, super laser focused on, is creating real value and real impact for domestic workers. We're not falsely chasing growth just yet. We're not falsely, you know what I mean? We're really focused on how do we create the maximum amount of good and impact for this workforce that has often been left behind from our laws, from the market, from culture, right? And so how is it that we can come in with the thing that we're building and stay really focused on that? What we're really proud of is that the impact is really real. Like, Aaliyah is live. There are people who, for the first time in 10 years, have never taken a paid sick day, are being able to request a day off and not worry about losing their income. It's a really, really powerful thing. The thing we hear from our workers, I did a demo about it with Aaliyah at our national convention with all the domestic workers. And, one of the workers very timidly asked whether all domestic workers across the country could use it. And, when I was like, unequivocally, yes, it doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter where you work, it doesn't matter how you work, it doesn't matter where you're from, you can benefit from this system. And we basically got like a standing ovation, which, and then at the closing part of some of the listening sessions, what we are hearing from workers is this is a dream come true. We've never, ever thought that we'd be able to get access to the same things that other people have in the economy. And we're so grateful for this. So we're really proud of the impact that we're making, I think. But we're obviously here because we want to do more. And we want to borrow from product design, and we want to borrow from marketing, and we want to borrow from UX. And we need people who want to kind of get on this journey with us and totally create something disruptive and new. So in many ways, in closing, I think we see ourselves in kind of the work that we're doing as, in a way, like an advanced team for all of us. We're kind of out on the edges of the economy. We're out on the edges of like kind of things that are unknown and uncharted. And we have this kind of belief, which is almost like the opposite of conventional wisdom, that if we solve for the hardest problem first, right, if we actually ignore low-hanging fruit, but actually go for the hardest thing to solve for, we can have a trickle-up effect, that we can actually break open progress for lots of different workers and lots of people who are vulnerable in the economy if we solve for the hardest use case first. So it's hard, don't get me wrong, it's definitely hard, but I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress in terms of where we are, and I think our hope and belief is not to stay narrow on domestic workers. Of course, they're an important population that deserves the talent that you all bring and the effort that we're putting into this. But I think the promise of this is that we can actually create a much more equitable economy for everybody.
I just want to start actually from the personal and then build out to the structural. But I mean, starting with the two of you, you could do a lot of different things in life. You could be working a lot of different places. I was just talking to Palak before this about she's hopping on a red eye tonight, after doing a full day today. You have such passion. Why did you choose this life, and why did you choose this topic?
You go first?
You go.
Okay. Well, I think that A lot of it has to do with the influence of being raised by my mom and my grandmother, and just really growing up believing that women walk on water and can do anything, and I saw them doing everything, right, in the household, working, in the community, everything. And so, you know, of course I expected that they would be in charge of everything. And growing up, what I've learned was very quickly was that actually women were not in charge, and quite the opposite. And I think the disconnect between women powering everything, but actually being overrepresented in positions of vulnerability and abuse, and underrepresented in positions of power and decision making, just really, it just really bothered me in some profound way. And so I was always drawn to women's organizations, and in college I volunteered at a domestic violence shelter for Asian immigrant women, and I worked the hotline because my grandparents raised me. I speak Mandarin, and I was able to work a bilingual hotline. And the women who called the hotline, yes, they were calling in moments of crisis because of the abuse that they were enduring, but they were also calling about the everyday crisis of working incredibly hard, but still not being able to make a living, and still not knowing how you're going to provide for your family. And the idea that we would have so many women working incredibly hard and still not able to make ends meet was something that I couldn't get out of my system. And it was always the domestic workers, as we would talk to women in the community, maybe because they're so isolated, and really get immediately the power of working together and coming together and building community, that they always wanted to organize. And so I sort of followed their lead for 21 years.
I kind of come at it a little bit differently. So my parents are Indian immigrants, and I was born into a minority religion. It's called Jainism. And the whole religion is premised on nonviolence. And it's a philosophical concept called ahimsa. And when my parents emigrated to the United States, it's such a minority religion in India, could not find any other Jain community. So we kind of became more attracted to the Hindu community and that part of the Indian community. And in that, all of a sudden, my mom's very much an intellectual, and I very much look up to my mom as well. And she really kind of began dabbling in Hindu spiritual philosophy. And basically, I can save you the time of reading volumes of scripture. There's basically one main concept, and that it's we're all one, right? It's Sanatana Dharma. And so I was very influenced by that ideology, the idea, it's not really ideology, but the idea that we are all one. And then I think what happened to me, I just got really bothered every single time I saw a contradiction to that. And I just couldn't accept it. And, some of it was reason, some of it was observed, some of it was felt, but I just couldn't let go of it. It's taken me I've kind of meandered in a lot of different spaces. Aijin and I always joke about how I've, been in government, and I've been in, I worked in management consulting, and I've, was trained as an organizer, and I've kind of been in a lot of different worlds. But I think that a common theme has been not really feeling settled with the, that contradiction that I'm seeing around me, which obviously, has really accelerated in the last, 10 years or so.
As we think about ourselves as Googlers and the community of Googlers, there's ways that we can help at various levels, but I want to keep it personal for just a minute and say, what is your advice to those of us who may employ people as caregivers or in our homes? What are the kinds of principles that we should be applying to make sure we're being ethical and supportive?
Well, I think that we have some values that are pretty straightforward and obvious, in that it is about treating others the way that you would want to be treated at work, right? And for us, we have pages and pages of exactly what that looks like that lots of workers have consulted on and kind of put in place as our set of standards, but it boils down to three things. One is a living wage, paying a living wage. The second is having a clear work agreement. So having a really explicit conversation about what are the expectations. And then the third is about paid time off. And that really is about a recognition that this is a profession for people and they have families and hobbies even. And that just those three simple things, those kind of guideposts, can really help set the foundation for a really healthy relationship, I think.
So switching over to technical world, product world, which is going to be where a lot of folks in this room live, a lot of folks on the live stream. You know, we have a launch and iterate culture at Google. So when you're sharing about failures, we're very familiar with that. And, you know, failure leads to learning and insights and improvement.
It's not the goal, though.
It's not the goal, but oftentimes it's a zigzag path.
Totally.
It's usually not a straightforward path. I just, you know, curious if you have insights that you gleaned along the way from some of your false starts or, you know, aha moments as you have tried to develop technology and product to serve this sector.
Yeah. I mean, we are very much influenced by that launch and iterate model and the lean, you know, the kind of lean and agile approach. I mean, there's no more of an under-resourced and, you know, environment than the one that we're in. So we have to be really, really smart about, you know, our cycles and where we're actually putting very valuable dollars and resources and time. So what's really interesting about the Aaliyah launch and the product that we built is there's a few things that have been kind of consistent, you know, across it, like some insights that we've learned. So one is that people actually generally do want to do the right thing. They do. They just don't know how, or it's not easy, or it's like a pain to figure it out, right? And so I think part of that was, you know, part of that's been consistent even as we've kind of zigged and zagged all along the way. The second, and this is really apparent in the Aaliyah product, where I do think we could use some really smart product designers and UX folks to help us, is the power differential between the domestic worker and their employer, no matter how kind that relationship might even be, is real. There's a real gap in power. And when you're essentially asking your client to contribute to Aaliyah, you're asking for a bit of a raise. And all of us who've asked for raises before at work, I mean, it's a little intimidating to do that, right? And so I think we have this hypothesis that there's something about a third-party intermediary, the platform, the Aaliyah platform or the product, that can play a role in helping to kind of ease the awkwardness and you can't eliminate that power differential, it is what it is, but really figure out how the product can be in service of closing that gap. So that's been something that's really consistent. We've heard that time and time again from like feedback sessions and user reviews and all of that. And then the last thing that's been constant, and which I've talked about already, is that the impact is very real. Like, you know, people have said to us, you know, oh, like, what can my $5 actually do? Well, actually, it's like your $5 and your $5 and your $5 actually does quite a bit. And $100 might not seem like a lot to you, but it can like make or break a person's like weekly budget, right? So I think that those things have been consistent. The thing that's been actually really, I mean, it's surprising and it's not surprising, but it's actually really hard for us to figure out what to do with this now, which is actually the red eye that I'm taking is to go to a Google Sprint in New York with Googlers to help us think through this challenge.
Hey, Google New York.
Is the thing that's been really hard and like it's like a nut to crack is the workers who are invited to Aaliyah through their clients tend to be way more successful in getting other customers and clients on board than ones where a worker initiates the process. And this is a very difficult learning for us because our competitive advantage is in our relationship to the workers. And so it's not to say it's like a total failure, it's just like it's harder. And so there's like two streams of work. One is to kind of actually figure out the client marketing side, which is actually what the sprint is about tomorrow, like thinking about the client user journeys and their personas. But then on the worker side, our movement is really digging deep now into what are the supports and scaffolding that we provide in person or through organizing or through kind of the known traditional structures of our movement to support workers in the process.
So, apart from the topic, one of the things that I've been most struck by you and working with you and your team is that you're led by women, you're led by workers, you're a movement, and movements by their very nature are organic and a little bit messy. You have, even just listening to your own backgrounds, personal backgrounds and motivations and sort of thought process, there's such a range there and diversity. And so my question is about that intersectionality when you're bringing together a whole diverse, vibrant, changing, moving group of people, both from a membership level and a leadership level. Maybe just speaking to some of your insights and thoughts.
Well, I would say that early on, just embracing with everything you have that unruliness. The hardest and best part of organizing is the humans. And that is where the power is, that's where the dynamism is, and the diversity of the humans is actually a huge source of power and strength if you really design your culture to embrace it. And so that requires a lot of attention and thought. I mean, half the job of an organizer is to really think about the context that you're creating for people. What are the experiences you're creating? What are the moments of transformation that you're catalyzing? And the beautiful thing about it is that even though people come from a million different places and experiences, when you're moving in the same direction around common values and common goals, it creates such an incredible container for transformation and relationship building and understanding and a sense of common purpose and purpose in general. It is really a beautiful thing. I don't mean to romanticize it at all, because it is very hard to organize. Organizing is hard. It's really hard. It's really hard. But it is about when you are able to harness the collective energy and voice of a group of people who are really about asserting the dignity and the beauty of humanity, there's nothing like it. And so just embracing the unruliness and thinking with a lot of intention about how you're creating the context for people to show up as their best selves and bring that to the table. And then just being open to things being a little bit out of control.
Sort of have that mantra at Google as well. Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more quick question and then open it to questions. So get ready with your questions, and Anthony, you'll bring the mic. So we have a lot of Googlers who I think love your mission and your ethos and your work and are interested in how they can get involved and help. So we have go.org fellowships to learn specifically about some of the existing scoped work, go.org fellowships. But anything you want to say to Googlers about specific skills or even maybe locations or things that you could use help with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've mentioned some of the areas, but I think a lot of it is around thinking about how can products interact with offline interactions and the online interaction? Like, how do we create, the conditions? Because I don't think it will be possible for us to, like with Aaliyah, for example, to only have just a straight online experience, because the employer and the cleaner end up talking to each other about it. And so figuring out how to accommodate all those different parts of the user journey and have the product not get in the way of it, but actually support it, I think is, in general, something I think we're struggling with at this moment and just kind of in our early stage. And then I think this realization about clients and customers and talking to them, finding them, persuading them, inspiring them, figuring out how to tell the story of Aaliyah and what it means. I think is going to be another area where we're going to need some help. And I think that encompasses product design folks and UX folks and marketing folks and creative
We
folks.
even have a behavioral sciences team led by the way, badass women.
That would be really
We
great
need
too.
that.
That would be helpful.
Maybe they're in the room.
If you're out
on the
there, we
live
need
stream.
you.
Yeah, we will track you down.
The other thing I will say is, in some ways, you can think, I mean, Aaliyah itself is an MVP, right? But I think you can think, or not really, it's like we've launched now, but it's early. I think in some ways, you can think about the Aaliyah platform as an MVP for a new way for social movements to build their digital membership and to really kind of modernize, I think, what membership in a social movement and an organization can look like. And so I think we're kind of toggling between the very specific, concrete, tactical problem that we're solving, but like imagining, okay, what could this actually break open in the way that social movements adapt to the technological age?
Okay, do we have any questions in the room from Googlers? Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and speaking. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about care in our society. For instance, what would it mean for us to value care as a labor equal to any other labor, and how would we, like, what are steps we can take to get to a point where we value care as a labor?
Awesome. I love this question. So let's see, Gloria Steinem, I think 30 years ago, wrote an article called Revaluing Economics. And in that article, she basically says that there are these two resources that have been completely made invisible and undervalued in our culture, but that actually power everything else, that make everything else possible in our economy. And those are the planet's natural resources and care. The work, the energy that goes into raising families. And that we are now at a point in the evolution of humanity where if we don't revalue those two fundamental resources and put them at the center of how we think about design of our economies in a way that is intentionally valuing those forces or those resources, that we won't actually be able to sustain a healthy economy and growth in the future. And so the way I think about it is, what if we thought about care like infrastructure, right? If the definition of infrastructure is that which enables commerce or everything else in our economy to happen, care is that, right? The ability to make sure that we can reproduce and that across the lifespan, we can live with dignity and health, right? And well-being and independence, autonomy, agency, all those words that are so valuable. If we invested in that as infrastructure and as fundamental to everything else being possible, then we'd be getting somewhere, closer to Gloria's vision. And part of that infrastructure, it's different from bridges and tunnels, because a big part of that infrastructure is human beings, right? And so we have to really also rethink infrastructure to really think about human infrastructure, and how does infrastructure allow or enhance our human capacity to care for each other. So I know all of that is super kind of conceptual, but in a very concrete way, yesterday in Washington, we just launched this report. It was an academic study panel that we commissioned to study the viability of a policy idea we call universal family care. The idea that in the future we should have one social insurance fund that we all contribute to, that we can all benefit from, that helps us pay for childcare, elder care, and paid family leave. Basically everything we need to take care of our families while we're working. And it would basically resource our care infrastructure enough that we could ensure that every single care job is a good job that's sustainable and people could take care of their families too. So that's the concrete policy idea that we're trying to get policymakers to think about. But the conceptual idea is, what if we really did reimagine what it takes for our economy, reimagine and revalue the fundamentals in our economy?
I think we have a question up front.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here and thank you for the work that you do. My mom has actually been in this line of work since I was born, so it's amazing to see like the usability
You're in the
of
family.
this. Exactly. So my mind gravitates towards the questions that I would ask for someone like my mom who might be using it, and so like language barriers, and then for people that like my mom who may be, so it's no longer her status now, but at one point in time she was undocumented. So I'm thinking about what are some of the barriers, what are some of the limitations that you are thinking about in the next iteration of the product?
That's a really great question. And remember when I was talking about how we start from a more precise place because we know the workforce? So one, we've built the platform entirely already in English and Spanish. The workers can access their accounts, claim their benefits in Spanish. We have our outreach, our customer service is in Spanish to start. We obviously, if you've ever come to if you get a chance to come to one of our assemblies, that's actually how iGen recruited me. I was working on my own startup, and then she was like, I think you should come and check us out. And I was like, okay. And then I went, and it was like this amazing display of domestic workers leading for 4 days. And anyway, so at our events, we often have things in simultaneous interpretation in like 7 or 8 different languages. And so our vision would be to expand beyond English and Spanish as soon as we can. On the question of can anybody use it? Yes, anybody can use it because our system does not need or require any information about your immigration status or anything like that. It's like going to Amazon. Amazon doesn't ask you for stuff like that. Our platform doesn't either because we spent a lot of time on the legal kind of nuts and bolts of how we built this and how we could actually make this whole thing work beyond that issue, just in general. And really what's happening on our site is you're purchasing credits in someone's account, and those credits are accumulating in the worker's account. So the product is available to anybody who works in the industry.
NDWA has surveyed domestic workers. What are the 2 to 3 biggest needs of the community that you guys found during the survey?
The two biggest, what we built for is what actually the workers need. So the first benefit that is the core to the product is paid time off. This kind of replacement pay, so to speak, if you don't go to work, how can you use that aggregated contribution and draw it down? So like a worker, if she's been accruing, dollars for several months and wants to take a day off, she goes into her early account, requests a day off, and can get that amount of what we've set right now is $120 for a day off. So she can get that those funds dispersed to her. And then surprisingly, this was actually a surprise to me and I think some of us that were building the product, folks really want life insurance. Which is, when you kind of think about it, you're like, oh, okay, wow, people are really worried about their children. What would happen to them if something, what would happen to their children if something happened to them? And so it's another benefit that's already available on the platform. Other concerns that are harder to solve for, which we would like to in the next year or so, is healthcare and retirement. So how do we address much larger, more thorny questions, especially as it intersects with federal policy and the state exchanges and the ACA and all of that. So really kind of navigating through that and hopefully getting to the other side of being able to offer products in those 2 areas.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I want to thank Susanna and Kim for organizing our conversation today and for Chelsea, who's been helping to organize Googlers, and you think your organizing is hard. No. And Andrew, who's not here, and others from the team who have been liaising and helping this great partnership to flourish. And of course, thank you both so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend time with Googlers, help to inform us, I think inspire us, and galvanize us to come around you and the movement even more. So thank you so much.
Thank you.